First of all, Hamilton was a patriot. He really was. And he saw combat, and you're right, he impressed Washington. Washington made him a confidant. But by the way, he also served in the Articles of Confederation Congress. Mm-hmm. So he was involved in virtually every aspect of the nation's founding. Now, that said, when they met at the Constitutional Convention, he was one of the 3 delegates from New York. And he made a proposal for a fairly centralized and powerful national government. Mm-hmm. And his proposal really wasn't taken that seriously, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, after the Constitution was adopted at the Constitutional Convention, he became extremely important in helping to persuade some of the states in these debates. As you know, he's one of the 3 authors of the various essays in the Federalist Papers, him, John Jay, and James Madison. And he became very important to Madison in that respect, too. And so there are really different aspects to his life, different aspects to his personality, and he argued very strongly and effectively in the Federalist Papers for the adoption of this Constitution. The biggest problem they had in adopting the Constitution was the concern about would the states remain sovereign, or was there way too much power being given to the central government? And what Jay and Madison and Hamilton, particularly the latter 2, were trying to do is persuade the anti-Federalists, who were really the Federalists, but to persuade the anti-Federalists that they didn't have a lot to worry about. But, you know, George Mason and several others said, no, we do have a lot to worry about. And then what happened was it looked like they might lose some of the states in the ratification process, including Massachusetts. The Constitution was almost defeated in Massachusetts. John Adams had to twist arms and use every persuasive power and political instinct he had to get it passed. His cousin Sam Adams was against it and was fighting it. And it became obvious to Madison and Hamilton and Jay and the Federalists that they had to accede to Mason and several of the others on this notion of a Bill of Rights, which at the time was actually 12 amendments, not 10. They didn't call them the Bill of Rights. And they were copied after the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which Madison had authored. And the Virginia Declaration of Rights became the basis for our Bill of Rights, which Madison authored, and which are both based on the writings and philosophy of, in many respects, not completely, but John Locke. Mm-hmm. So to make a long story short, Hamilton was absolutely crucial during the founding period. On the other hand, he was one of the more statist-related founders, if we want to call him a statist. But let me tell you something. I do not believe for a second that any of the founders, including Hamilton, would accept, let alone embrace, what's going on in the country today. I believe every single one of them, including Hamilton, would reject it. Have I answered your question?
Yes, I agree. And like I said, in Federalist 17, he kind of does say that the smaller things, items from day to day, from citizen to citizen, should be handled by the local authorities. And I just, because Federalist 27, I think Andrew's kind of got it. He's kind of using it as a thing to claim Hamilton was a statist, but I don't think he's reading it right. Hamilton was more...
I do not like using this word statist to define the founding fathers.
I don't either. He was a patriot and a warrior and actually sought service, and I don't see any statist from today even willing to do that. So
Now let me just say this. Since I reintroduced this word to the body politic and liberty and tyranny, let me explain what I think statist means. And you can go back to Aristotle and probably before, where these words were used. They were used by Reagan in his early speeches before he was running for president or governor. What I mean by statist is the adoption of this progressive, socialist, Marxist mentality, which treats the individual as a statistic, treats the individual as really meaningless, and imposes this sort of super powerful government on top of the individual. Now, we can call it socialism, Marxism, fascism, whatever it is. It has different levels of tyranny, and there's no question about that. So I use this word statist to try and just generally define them, because when I was writing Liberty and Tyranny, it's not a book on communism or fascism or this, that, or the other. It's a book on liberty versus tyranny. So there is no way that I would call Hamilton a statist, because he fought in the American Revolution. He rejected the idea of a king, of a centralized government of that sort. And while he favored a more consolidated, centralized government than virtually all of the other framers at the Constitutional Convention, but there were others too, he would never have favored the kind of massive administrative state, I don't believe, or consolidation of three branches of government that we see today. So I think calling him a statist is a mistake. Calling him one of the founders who favored a more centralized, concentrated government that I think was worthy of our founding, that's probably accurate. But I don't trash him. I mean, this was an argument at the time, so I think he would completely reject what's going on today.
I agree. And just to be clear, the Federalist Papers, he wasn't in an argument with Madison and Jay. They were united in trying to convince him. Okay.
But you have to understand, a lot of people from a particular school of thought, I'm thinking of Ron Paul and some of his senior supporters, not all of his backers, they don't like James Madison either.
Right.
They don't like any of the Federalists. But I step back from this. Forget about Ron Paul and these others. If you read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, it's absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, in some respects, the authors of the Anti-Federalist Papers, you take a look at Yates from New York, among others, they were correct about some of the things that would happen to the Constitution and so forth. But, Benjamin Franklin said it at the end of the Constitutional Convention. I'm paraphrasing. And he was too sick to stand up and give a speech himself. So he had his fellow Pennsylvania delegate give it for him. He wrote it out, James Wilson, who they also hate. And Franklin basically said, look, if the people don't, and I'm paraphrasing, if the people don't want liberty, they're not going to have liberty.
Right.
If the people want to live under tyranny, they're going to live under tyranny. We're giving them, in essence, a guidance. We're giving them a national law that is intended to protect them. I'm embellishing this, but this is the point he made. So this is the point I make too. If we, the people, want to live in tyranny, we're going to live in tyranny. Mm-hmm. If we want to be drones, we're going to be drones. If we want to be dependent, we're going to be dependent. And that's the big question today. Are there enough of us who say no to this, even though they've tried to buy us off with different entitlement programs and in public schools and public this and public transportation and public that? Have they bought off enough of us where we're going to wind up surrendering our liberty, or are we in a position to reestablish a limited constitutional government? That's the battle of the day. That's the battle forever. I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours, but I fear that most of you would be bored stiff. But I promise you, you're going to love what I have coming in the next few months if you enjoyed that kind of discussion. Now, Hamilton, part of the plan he presented to the Constitutional Convention, I don't know if this interests you folks or not, but since tomorrow's Constitution Day, I'll just touch on it, was really dismissed by the whole convention. He he presented a plan called for lifetime terms for senators and the executive. You might say, oh my God. Well, one of the things he feared, and frankly, most of the framers feared, was too much of a majoritarianism, too much of a pure democracy. Because keep in mind, they believed in, as we do, unalienable rights. So your fellow citizens can't vote to take life, liberty, or your pursuit of happiness, and that includes your property rights away, through the ballot. And there was some concern about that. So they were looking for ways to balance this. They didn't want dictatorship. On the other hand, they didn't want factionalism and anarchy with a pure form of majoritarianism. But he also did propose a Congress or a House that would be elected by the people. So they were coming up with different ideas and promoting them. That's the genius of the Constitutional Convention as a whole, the genius of these men in the aggregate. But you can imagine why Jefferson couldn't stand Hamilton and vice versa. Jefferson, agrarian, state sovereignty. Hamilton, urban, New York City. State sovereignty, yes, but a much more powerful central government. And Hamilton, in my view, was wrong. But Hamilton fought like hell for the Constitution. As we just discussed, he was one of the authors of essays in what became known as the Federalist Papers. The great debate of the time. But he also persuaded the New York State Convention to ratify the Constitution, which was originally strongly against it. So Hamilton, after they left the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, went back to New York and fought like hell to get the Constitution adopted. The statists today reject the Constitution. Whether it's Thomas Friedman, and I can go on and on, activists on the court, individuals in Congress, they reject the Constitution. So I don't put Hamilton in the same category as these fools today who want to undermine the law of the land. So that's why I don't call him a statist. I just explain what he did and what he believed in. If we can reestablish the Constitution of this country, we will save this country. And the idea that the Constitution doesn't allow for government. You know, Mike, the Constitution allows for pretty much as big of a state government as you want as a state citizen. But it also allows you to move around the country to escape these big state governments and go somewhere else, as you see. The problem is that when the central government becomes like a big state government and dictates all the way down to the local level, there's nowhere to escape to. So, people say, well, we won't have health care. Well, you either pay for your own health care, there are a zillion other options. I don't know how we survived as a people without Obamacare. I don't know how we survived as a people before the New Deal. I don't know how we survived as a people before the Great Society. I can tell you this. We were more independent. We were more self-sufficient. We were better educated. I just feel we were a more moral people, frankly. Now, back to the Constitution. Mike, Modesto, California, the great KSFO. Your question, which is profound. If the Constitution was to prevent the tyranny that we see, how did we go wrong? Because we have had individuals, both in and out of public office, who have made it their objective to de-link the society from the Constitution. And they have largely succeeded. And there's a history behind this, and there are particular individuals who've been involved in this, and they have largely succeeded. So even today, when you dare to bring up the Constitution, you're attacked, aren't you, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, what are you, post-Social Security and Medicare? What, you don't believe in the highway system? What, you don't believe this? You don't believe... There are ways to respond to that, which I'll do another day. But the fact of the matter is, that's what's happened. And now it's been institutionalized. So now they are using the Constitution and abusing the Constitution to impose the will of temporary politicians and a massive bureaucracy on us. And the really big turning point came when the Supreme Court, having fought this kind of political heresy, embraced it, endorsed it, gave its imprimatur, and now we call it precedent, which means, to we pedestrians, there's no way out, because they're saying, we have opinions, we've issued opinions in the past that say this is all perfectly good, and we follow our past precedent, so we're going to keep saying it's perfectly good. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's one of the reasons this individual mandate battle is so crucial. If we win that battle in the Supreme Court, it'll be the first time, really, in decades, that we've pulled back from the precipice and that the Supreme Court has finally stood up and said, no, actually, government, you can't do that. No, actually, government, Congress, the president, you can't force individuals to do things against their best interest all the time. And this is one of those cases where we're saying no. And I promise you they will be trashed in the most vicious way, the same way Obama and his liberal drone friends attacked them when they dared, in a small way, a very, very small way, to uphold the First Amendment when it comes to political speech. Let me put it to you this way. Liberalism, and I've said this before, and constitutionalism cannot work together. They're incompatible. Liberalism, let me repeat it so the backbenchers can repeat it. Liberalism and the Constitution are incompatible. You understand what I mean, right?